All right, then I think we should go ahead. So good morning, everyone. As you would recall, yesterday's first session, there were too many small details. But if you thought that there were too many small details in yesterday's session, I don't know what you would say about today's first session, because it's about citations and references, something that is full of trivial details and something that researchers who obviously focus on their work, their science, tend to neglect this. But especially when it comes to publishing your work, journals tend to take this quite seriously. As you could see here, there's this warning from a journal that some journals say this upfront, that if we see that the style of references that you have followed is not compliant with what we want, then your manuscript even doesn't stand a chance of being reviewed. So before you reach that stage where manuscript is going to be reviewed for your research, for its contents, you also need to get rid of some of these obstacles. That is the importance. By themselves, the formatting, as I said, it is totally trivial, but it can be a roadblock. So let us first get our terms in order. Now, typically what you see is in text, you see citations. So citations occur in the body of the research paper, body of the thesis, body of the project report, whatever. And these are essentially pointers. A citation is a pointer to more details which are appended at the end of the paper. And essentially, these are all sources from which you have taken either some information, maybe a definition, maybe some data. So essentially what you are saying is that some of the statements that you will make, they are not your own, but they are supported by other findings. So essentially that is the job of citing. So you are also acknowledging it. See, science, the edifice of science, the edifice of technology is built on the work that has gone before. There is a quotation often ascribed to Sir Isaac Newton. Newton is supposed to have said that if I have been able to see far, that's because I was standing on the shoulders of giants. So if somebody on the stature of Newton is saying this, so that is how science advances, that somebody makes a breakthrough, then others extend that breakthrough further and so on. So that's the philosophy bit. But the point is that a citation is a pointer to greater information about the source, and that's how you indicate the source. Now, in this case, if you can decipher the shorthand, so you have a statement: the majority of microorganisms in their natural habitat cannot be cultured and remain unidentified. So who is saying this, or who can you cite in support of this statement? So this author is citing three sources, and they're all presumably publications by Croete et al., that is, and others. So there were probably too many names to be mentioned here. Then this team, this pair, Haldem and Amy, and Wagner and co-workers. And also the year is mentioned. So as I said, this is a pointer to something that occurs at the end of the document, where you find further details. So what is this paper? So what was the title of the paper? The title of the paper by Croete, Broazel, and von Holly is Practical Aspects of Biofouling Control in Industrial Water Systems. It was published in a journal, International Biodeterioration and Biodegradation. It was published in volume 29 of that journal, and pages 299 to 341 are filled by this particular article. So that is the decoding. So it's like a formula. So once, I mean, you are an academic, you get to know how to read this. Now, it doesn't really say that the name of this journal is Applied Environmental Microbiology. No, it doesn't say that. By its very placement and other typographic cues, for instance, it is italicized, then you are expected to know that is its name of a journal. The number that follows the name of the journal, sometimes it comes after the year, is the volume number and so on. So these are minute details, but that is how references go. Now, where this citation, before I go further, I should mention that citations can be in the form that I've just shown you, that is names of authors and the year of publication, or citation can simply be numbers. So the very first source that you want to cite in your thesis or in your paper, you number it 1. The next source that you cite, you number it as 2, and so on. And at the end of your paper, there is a numbered list, again with the same bibliographic information that I've just shown you. So the citations could be in the form of numbers also. I will come to that later. So they occur in the body of the text. And as I said, it could be one author, it could be several authors, whatever. So these are citations. And there are other details that you need to scrutinize. Now, for instance, you take these 3 citations. So there is the name of the author, and then there is the year of publication. Between the two, there is only space. There is no comma. But this is a matter of the publisher's style. Now, some publishers will put a comma between the names of authors and the year of publication, and a semicolon to separate one citation from the next. So here we have 3 citations, Croete et al., Haldeman and Amy, and Wagner et al. Each is separated from the next with a semicolon. So these are some matters that you need to focus on when we'll come back to that. The purpose of showing another example of a citation is that citation can be attributed to an organization. It doesn't always have to be a named person or people. Like in this case, Institute of Medicine or US Department of Health and Human Services. So a publication, very often publications are issued by entities that don't give credit to particular authors. So in that case, the entity that has published this document, I mean, you take Indian Standards Institution, for instance. Now, although there are committees to approve each standard and there could be a lead author, but standards are all attributed to Bureau of Indian Standards. So it is also possible. Now here's another reference that has been cited so many times. So you know who the authors are. The authors are these mostly Dutch, Van der Greer, Hanrads, Lupton. Year of publication is 2000. Title is The Art of Writing a Scientific Article. The journal in which it was published is called Journal of Science Communication. It was in volume 163, issue number 2. And it ran from page 51 to page 59. But the point of showing you all this is a total fabrication. There is no such paper at all. Yet it has been cited so many times. This paper doesn't exist, but it has been cited more than 400 times. How did this happen? Now, this was merely chosen to illustrate how you should write a reference for a paper in a journal. So if you go back to that, what it is showing you is that you should have the name of the journal in full, not abbreviated. It should be in italics with every significant word capitalized. So not only J in journal, but S in science and C in communication. Then there should be a volume number, then there should be a colon, and then there will be full page numbers. So this is what Elsevier journal wanted to illustrate. It was illustrative only. It was not an actual paper at all. And yet many people cited it. If you want to read about it, there's the link, The Mystery of the Phantom Reference. So you see what it shows you, the lesson to be learned here is that, to be honest, you should be able, only those documents, only those sources you have consulted yourself in person, only those you should cite. Don't borrow citations from your predecessor's thesis or some other papers which the original sources which you have not seen. That's important. So as I explained to you, citations and references, that's the difference. They're embedded in main text and they match, or they have a corresponding reference at the end of the paper. And they serve essentially as pointers. Now in the reference, all the details that you give, as I have shown you, you give the details of all the authors, the year of publication, the name of the journal, the title of the paper, the volume number, page number. If it's a book, then you will say who are the publishers. If it's any edition other than first, if no edition is specified, of course, first edition is assumed. If it's a conference paper that you are citing, then you need to say where the conference was held, who organized it, and so on. So the function of this, the purpose of giving all these details is threefold. That you should be able to pinpoint the source. So if somebody wants to look up, they don't have to take your word for it. They can consult the original. So you should give enough information not only to pinpoint the source unambiguously, but you should also give some information for them to judge what sort of a document it is. So by mentioning the title of the paper, for instance, you are providing that information. By giving the year of publication, you are saying how recent or how old it is. And if somebody really wants to get hold of that document, then how do you go about it? Now, simplest thing will be in this case, in some case will be a URL. So if you give the URL, then in theory, it should be accessible to anybody just so long as they have access to the net and so on. So it is important that you cite responsibly and accurately, which means you must provide full bibliographic information, but only of the sources you have seen for yourself. And later on, I will take you through a whole story which shows what irresponsibility or not being true can lead to. As far as possible, avoid copying whole blocks of text from some source and put it in your paper, because then you'll be always caught in a similarity check. If you think it's essential that you reproduce the text word for word, as I said, maybe a definition, then put it in quotation marks and give a source. That way you cannot be accused of plagiarization. But as far as possible, you can borrow ideas, but not the words in which they were expressed. So those should be your words. And if you can't remember the source, then you cannot include that information. You can't say that, well, I definitely remember reading somewhere that the melting point of this alloy is whatever, X degrees Celsius. But you don't remember where you saw that. So you can't give the source. In that case, no, you cannot cite it because you are not able to provide any details of the source. And as I said, you should give complete reference. We'll come back to that as when we discuss this. So for instance, you see this statement like that. In fact, this came from a paper I was editing. This is some statistic. And the author gave the source as Times of India, dated 20th of August, 2013. So I queried the author. I said, see, Times of India cannot be the original source. Times of India is reporting these numbers, but the numbers themselves must have come from other source. And as an author, you are expected to cite the original source, not secondhand. So when we probe further and we search, of course, these days so much easier because you have the resources of the web at your disposal. So then we traced it to a report published by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation. So it was in this report on page 32 that this particular bit of statistics was derived from. So this was what should have been given as a reference, that it's a Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty document. This was the title, because typically when you cite reports, it is customary to cite the who was chairing the committee. And then P32 means page 32. So on page 32, you'll find that particular bit of information, and 74 PP is for plural, pages. So the whole document ran to 74 pages. Or take another example. So this was again a statement. It was about calorie consumption. And it was given, the source was given as green facts ND. ND means no date, because normally you are expected to supply the year of publication, but here that was not available. So it is given as ND, no date. So then again, I said, see this, whether this is really the original source. So I looked up green facts. That particular issue was there on the net, and this is what it showed. But in turn, they had borrowed it from a document published by the Food and Agriculture Organization. So this was the original source. So on page 30, table 2.1, you can find this particular bit of statistics. So that is what I'm saying, that you should trace it to the original. So this was the title of that FAO document, World Agriculture Towards 2015-2030. It was, these were the editors. It was published by EarthScan from London. And of course, if you wanted to download, then you have the link. So that is what I meant, that you should cite the original source, not somewhere you may have borrowed from it. So this was actually the original document, and this was the table in question. Now, there are some things for which you don't need to cite a source. For instance, if you are saying that, the sun rises in the east, well, nobody is expecting you to cite a source for that. So what is common knowledge, what is well known, you really don't need any sources. So all these are, you don't have to cite it. Likewise, the second category is that there will be a citation, although most citations will have a matching or corresponding reference at the end. There are some citations that will not have a matching reference. So this is one such category. Let's say you wanted some bit of information and you wrote to somebody, and that person responded to you through email or WhatsApp message, whatever. And that is the source of your information. So in the body of your paper, in the body of your thesis, body of your document, you will say that this is personal communication from XYZ. You can even mention the date, but there will be no corresponding reference. The reason for this is it is understood that what you are listing under references should in theory be accessible to everybody, that they should not be such that others have no access to. Now, if it's a personal letter or email you have received, then it's not publicly accessible. Or if it's your data that has not been published, typically what happens, this is a question that people often ask. Let's say you write a paper, you submit it to a journal for publication. You are writing another paper, and in which you want to use some of the data that you have used in the previous paper. But your previous paper is, we don't know yet whether it's going to be published. So how do you cite it? So the answer to that is you will have to give it as unpublished data. You can give your own name or whosoever is the owner of the data and say unpublished data. So that is what it means, that these will be citations, but they will not have a matching reference at the end. So now I want you to take you through along a story. Now it begins with this, that this person, he published a paper in 1995. And this was the title of the paper, The Dissemination of False Data Through Inadequate Citation. This was published in Journal of Internal Medicine, volume 238. Also note how the page numbers are given, because some journals do that. They want to give only the minimum amount of, they want to conserve space as much as possible. So instead of giving 448 to 449, they will only give the last digit. Anyway, never mind. So what did the paper say? In the body of this paper by Larson said this: he said that spinach is a rich source of iron is actually a myth. So spinach is not a particularly rich source of iron, but people believe that it's a rich source of iron because there was a mistake in placing the decimal point when they were expressing the iron content of spinach. So that is why spinach is supposed to be a rich source of iron, but actually it's a myth. This is what Larson is saying. And in support of this statement, Larson cited this, Hamlin, 1981. So what does it mean? It means that Larson is saying that this particular bit, that this is a myth, and the reason for this myth was a wrongly placed decimal. This came from Hamlin, 1981. And at the end of the paper, said he gave the source. So this is Hamlin's 1981 paper. The title of the article was just one word article, fake. This was published in British Medical Journal, volume 283, pages 1671 to 74. So this is how it works. Now, if you are writing it, somebody else is writing it, then, and they don't have access to Hamlin's paper, how would they do it? They would say that this myth is a good, that it's a myth. Larson, 1995, page 448. But better yet, you say myth that spinach is a good source of iron was born in whatever, and then Hamlin 1981 cited in Larson 1995. So as I said, I keep saying that you must have consulted the original source yourself, but sometimes if that is not possible, then you can follow this, that so cited in whatever. So what you are saying indirectly is, look, I have not consulted this paper by Hamlin. Larson has, and I have consulted Larson's document, and I'm making that amply clear by saying this. Okay, so far so good. Now, what did Hamlin write? Let us say we look up that paper in British Medical Journal, and what do we find? So Hamlin is saying that the original workers had put the decimal point in the wrong place. So that is why there is a tenfold increase. Now, what is the source for this information? So Mike Sutton decided to find out. So he asked Hamlin, where did you get that information from? And Hamlin said that, look, I don't remember, but I have not made it up. Yeah, but that is not acceptable. So in effect, Hamlin, who just quoted something from his memory, which may have misremembered, and then Hamlin was quoted by Larson, and many others would have quoted Larson and whatever. So that is why this is something that you should avoid. So this whole story, if you want to read it, that's the paper by Rekdal, Academic Urban Legends. So the whole point of telling you this story is that you need to cite responsibly by consulting the original source. There's another story. It revolves around the concept of Hawthorne effect. Hawthorne effect is the name given to this phenomenon that when you are observing somebody, they behave a little differently from what they would behave otherwise. Let's say that you are studying factory workers, and you put a webcam, so they don't know they are being observed. So they will work in a particular style or method or whatever, because they don't know they are being observed. But the moment you tell them that they are under observation, their behavior changes slightly or maybe largely. So this thing is called Hawthorne effect. All right, so far so good. And then there is this paper, they decided to study this Hawthorne effect. Wikstrom and Bendix decided to study what is this Hawthorne effect about. Is it really true that people's behavior changes? If so, why should it change? And so on. And what was their conclusion? This was their conclusion. As it reads, it is completely clear, unambiguous. So what are they saying? They concluded that this Hawthorne effect is ambiguous and disputable, and it's questionable whether this term has any function at all in evaluating results. So who's saying this? The people who studied this, that is Wikstrom and Bendix. You are with me so far? You are able to see this slide? The title is Careless Citations Make Myth Stronger. Excuse me, just 1 minute. Yes, actually. So this is very clear that they are saying that, don't believe in this Hawthorne effect. That is why we didn't find any evidence from that. Now, the other authors, they retrieved 196 papers, each one of which mentioned this paper by Wikstrom and Bendix. But the funny thing is, out of these 196 papers, as many as 155 said that Wikstrom and Bendix are saying that they affirmed, they supported Hawthorne effect. Now, what does that mean? When we have reproduced exactly what Wikstrom and Bendix said, that it is questionable, we found no evidence, and yet as many as 155 out of 196 papers that cite Wikstrom and Bendix are claiming that they in fact supported this. So either the authors, many of the authors of this 155 papers did not read the paper by Wikstrom and Bendix, or maybe they didn't understand it. That's sad. So that is something what you should avoid. So this was more of a story, but let's get down to the minute, trivial details. So as I said, citations could be by numbers. There's a name for it. It's called the Vancouver system. Why? Because the system was refined at some conference held many years ago in Vancouver. Or the examples that I've been giving you earlier, that is names of authors and the year of publication, that is also sometimes referred to as the Harvard system. Now, why should you know this? You should know this because sometimes journals in their instruction to authors simply say that this journal follows the Harvard system, or this journal follows the Vancouver system. So you should know what that means. So let us touch upon both. Now, Vancouver system, you would think that it's very simple. After all, each citation just has to be a number. There's no question of whether there should be a comma between the author's name and the year of publication and so on. It's just a number. But how will you print that number? Will you make it a superscript, or will you make it inline? That is the opposite of superscript, normal position, what we call inline. Will you enclose it in brackets, or just will you print it naked? If you use brackets, will they be round brackets, what we call parentheses, or in square brackets? And where will you place it? Will you place it at the end of the statement after the full stop or before? So you see, even numbers are very simple system. All these are possible, as you could see in this example. So they should be in inline, or all these are possibilities, and different journals follow different style. So as you could see here, Journal of Biological Chemistry. So citations are before the full stop, enclosed in round brackets, and they are not superscript, they are inline. Okay, that is JBC. The journal Science, what does it do? Same thing, before the full stop, within round brackets, not superscript, but italics. So that's the only difference. There's another journal, not round brackets, but square brackets, not superscript. So there could be any number of these minor variations. So whereas here another journal that is making it square brackets and superscripts, as you could see. So not inline, they are not inline, they are superscripts and they are enclosed in square brackets. Placement of that. Now here it is a superscript, neither square brackets nor round brackets, but placed before the full stop. So for instance, the journal Nature, another prestigious journal, follows this style. Current Science is another journal published from India that follows this style. So superscripts, no brackets before the full stop. Whereas here, exactly the same thing, that is superscripts, no brackets, but after the full stop. So you see, Vancouver system may look simple to you, but provided you need to take care of these details. Now we'll see Harvard system. Now this is the Harvard system. As you could see, there are names of authors. There is a comma between the name of the author and the year of publication, a semicolon between one citation and the next, and so on. But Harvard system also has its variations. Now, there are many papers that have 10, 15, 20, 30 authors. So what do? So then journals use this handy way. They use the abbreviation, the Latin abbreviation et al, et alia. Et ali means and others. But how many is too many? Now, some journals consider that if it's one author, two authors, or three authors, give the names. Four or more use et al after the first author. Some journals will say up to 6 authors, give all the names. 7 or more use et al. So it depends. Et al itself, should it be Roman, that is normal, or should it be in italics? So again, APA, that's American Psychology.
You are muted.
But actually the icon doesn't say, you can hear me now? No?
Yes, sir. You are audible now.
Okay. It's weird, but anyway. So how far did you lose me? Anyway, so as I was saying, this et al can be in italics, it can be in normal. But you should remember, and this is sometimes I see this mistake by some authors, they put a dot after et, which is totally wrong. Et may look like an abbreviation, but it's not. It is Latin for and. For instance, you write etc. So that same et. So never put a dot after et. You will put a dot after al because it stands for ALII. So that's an abbreviation, but et is not an abbreviation. And as I was pointing out, whether there will be a space or a comma. So some journals will place a comma between the names of authors and the year of publication. Some journals will only put a space. Again, APA puts a comma, but it may vary. I'll come to that later. Now, if the number of citations are grouped together, you know that they are separated by semicolons, but in what sequence should you arrange them? Should you arrange them alphabetically by the author, chronological, reverse chronological? Again, all these are found. Now, as I said, et al, some journals will say up to 3 authors, some journals say up to 2 authors. It simply depends. Some journals will say don't italicize it. Some journals will print it in italics. So varies from journal to journal. Even simple things. Now, whether you should put the symbol for and, the name for its symbol is ampersand, or should you write it AND? Now, what is the logic here? Some journals' logic is if the citation is within brackets, as you could see in the first instance. So these are the 4 authors, but the whole citation is within brackets. So you should use the ampersand. But if it's outside the brackets, so these people suggest, so only the year is in brackets. In that case, use AND. I mean, such are the trivial details that are expected. So use ampersand when it's parenthetical, use and when it is not. That's again APA style. So as I said, some journals prefer chronological order. So 2001, 2002, 2004, and so on. Some journals will even go in for reverse chronological order. So 2007, then 5, then 4, 2, so on. See that? And some journals will prefer it alphabetically, as you could see literally from A to Z. Abo, Alabi, Berger, Demand, whatever. So there's no one thing that is right or wrong. You should go by either the standard guide that has been prescribed or study the journal's style. What do you do with too many authors? There have been, astounding number of authors, more than 5,000 authors, imagine. Or when the human genome was sequenced and that was published, so many authors. You can see sometimes the names of authors probably will be more than the paper itself. So what do you do? So this is one such convention. So you list up to 19 authors. Then you put a dot, ellipsis, to show that something has been skipped, something has been omitted. And then you end the list with the last author. Then when you place the citation, especially the Harvard style, now, fortunately, there is no rule. It depends on how you have constructed a sentence. So you can start a sentence with it, you can put somewhere in between, you can put at the end, whatever. So for example, you could place a citation at the beginning of a sentence. So and so 2010 explored these connections. Or you could put it in the middle of a sentence. Information on shelf life, this is limited. Or you could put at the end of it. Students score higher when they take notes than the citation. Now, at times it does matter. Now take the middle example. Information on shelf life, Scuderi et al. 2010 is limited. What if you move the citation at the end of the sentence? So what if you were to write information on shelf life is limited, Scuderi et al. 2010. They don't mean exactly the same thing. As it stands now, when the citation is the middle of a sentence, you are saying, or the author is saying that this paper, this source, Scuderi et al., will give some information on shelf life. It is not saying anything about whether the shelf life is long or limited. But if you move it at the end of a sentence, then what you are implying is that if you look up this source, Scuderi et al. 2010, you will find a statement that information on shelf life is limited. So you see, it's not entirely left to, it depends on what you want to convey. That is what is important. So as I said, it could be alphabetic order, it could be in chronological order, and so whatever. Now, sometimes we also have bibliography. So there is a small difference between the references and bibliography. You can have both. Under references, you will list all those that have been referred to or cited in the body of the text. Whereas bibliography is sources that you may have consulted in preparing that paper or the thesis, but there's no actual citation to that source. So that comes under bibliography. So much for these citations and references. Now take, for instance, this notation, Nature 171:737. Now, what does it tell you? How do you decode this? Now you can, again, when you are used to the system, it is telling you that if you open volume 171 of the journal Nature, and if you open it at page 737, that is the source. So as I said, one of the functions of the references is to pinpoint the source with accuracy. So which is doing that? There can't be any other document which opens on page 737 of volume 171 of Nature. There can be only one such document. So the first part is fulfilled here. You are accurately pinpointing the source. But what else do you know? Do you know who wrote this paper? No, you have no clue. Do you know when it was published? No. Do you know what it was all about? The title of the paper? That's not supplied. Do you know that, okay, you know that it starts at page 737, but is it only one page long? Or maybe it's a review which 50 pages long? You have no information. So it is the job of the reference also to supply this information. That is why typically in the reference, we give the authors, the year of publication, the title of the article, which tells us something about what the article is about, and both the first page and the last page. So you know whether it's a longish paper or whether it's a short paper, and so on. Now, besides these trivial details, besides these nitty-gritty, you also need to keep these things in mind. That is, as I said, I have already said that you should only cite what you have seen for yourself. Otherwise, don't include. Typically, you should have done a good review of literature, which means your paper should have some recent references, some older classic references, and so on. It should be a good chronological spread. So it will tell the reviewers that you have been diligent, you have done due diligence in your literature collection. And typically, if you are submitting a paper to a journal, it is good to include some references to papers published in that journal. We will come to that later. And you can cite, yes, you can cite your own papers, but not too many. Now it comes to formatting references. So we talked about citations. So whether there should be a comma or a space, whether the multiple citations should be in chronological order or reverse chronological order or alphabetic order, and so on. But references have many more things. So I have grouped them into these 4 categories or 4 heads. That first of all, what are the bits of information you should include? Like if you are referring to a paper published in a journal, you must include the authors, the year of publication, the name of the article, the title of the article, the title of the journal, volume number, page numbers. If it's a conference, then who organized the conference, where was it held, when was it held, what was the title of the conference, all that you will mention. Then how, that is in what sequence you should arrange, where should you put the year? For instance, most European publishers will put the year in a reference immediately after the names of authors. So in the same way it occurs within the text. But many American publishers move the year closer to the volume number of the journal. So there's a sequence and those details. Then how do you separate? So whether you, for instance, some journals put a colon after the volume number before the page numbers. Some journals put a comma. Names of authors. Authors typically will have a family name or surname and initials. So how do you give the initials? Suppose you are putting this name, sing AD. So A dot and D dot, or just AD? Will there be a space between A and D? So all these things. And lastly, the typography. What is in italics, what is in bold, and so on. So these are typically the bits of information that are included in a reference depending on what kind of source it is. So if it's a whole book, then you must give the author of the book, the year in which it was published, the edition, if not first, publishers, and so on. If it's a web page, then at least the URL you must give it. If it's a news item, let's say you are submitting, quoting something from the Times of India, then the Times of India, but which edition? Is it Delhi edition? Is it Ahmedabad edition? Lucknow edition? Which one? And so on. So these are typically the bits that are given. So URL, it could be conference organizer. Many times, many journals say that if you are giving, citing a web page, if you are giving the URL, you should also give the date on which you accessed it. Because maybe it was there at that time, subsequently the website removed it from its contents, maybe. So you are saying that I accessed it on such and such date, so at least that time it was there. So any of these. See, volume, issue, and page numbers. Here also there is a matter of trivial detail. Now most journals continue their pagination across a volume, which means that, let's take a journal, see some imaginary journal, and the new volume begins with the new year. So 2022, another volume is started, and let us assume that it is published every 15 days. So let's say volume 19, issue 1, which was published in the first half of January. Then the second half, this was issue number 2, and so on. But as far as page numbering is concerned, volume 1, issue 1 started with page 1. Let's say the first issue was 64 pages long. So the last page on first issue was page 64. Second issue, the second half of January, will start with page number 65, not page 1, 65. And it will go on continuing until the volume is complete. So this is being published twice a month. So there'll be 24 issues in a volume. So once the 24th issue is closed, then the next year, again, it will start from page 1. So most journals follow this system. Most magazines don't follow this system. Most magazines begin every issue with page number 1. So if that is the case, to give a complete reference to a magazine article, you must also include the issue number. Why? Because the pagination is afresh for each issue. But for a journal, issue number is not essential because the pagination is continued across a volume. Now, yesterday I mentioned I asked the organizers for a copy of this guidelines for thesis preparation. So they sent me a copy. This is the handbook guidelines for thesis preparation, updated November 19. Well, I'm sorry, but things I couldn't help noticing that there's the style manuals or reference guides, and the latest is 2009. Now imagine this was revised in 2019, but the most recent source it is giving you is 209, 6th edition, which is actually now superseded because 7th edition was published last year. Not only that, I also noticed a few other things. For instance, it says line spacing. General text of the manuscript should be double spacing. Now this goes back to typewriter days. Well, you have an option double spacing in Word, but then you should simply say double spacing. 3 lines per inch is a typical typewriter thing. Essentially, actually, I was looking up trying to see whether you follow a Vancouver system or you follow Harvard system. guidelines don't mention, but my guess is that it must be the Vancouver system, because later on there are examples. So I'll come to that. So I came across these examples. So it is telling you how to give a reference to an article in a journal. And you see it is giving the initials first and then the author. H.E. Exner, R.M. German, J. Almloff. Whereas had it been Harvard system, I would have expected this to be inverted. So Exner, H.E. Because in Harvard system, the references are sorted alphabetically. In that case, the surname has to come first. But since it is not, I'm guessing that you are expected to follow Vancouver system. But guidelines actually don't mention this, or at least I didn't find it. The second thing I noticed that the format, the article title is in quotation, double quotation marks. The article title follows what we call the title case. So C in chemical is capitalized, N in nature is capitalized, and so on. This is in fact typical humanities, surprised to find this in guidelines for thesis preparation for IIT Kanpur. I mean, any IIT for that matter. Double quotation marks is definitely a humanities thing. Then actual putting V for volume, V dot, see, volume 24, volume 13, pages, PP dot. No, I mean, this is really quite ancient style, I must say. Then also I noticed some minor things. I mean, I'm a copy editor, that's my line of work. Now you see here, page 149 to page 173, here it's hyphen. Here also it's a hyphen in the example. Yesterday we talked about N dash, remember? So maybe, yeah, that's fine. You're not expected to bother about N dash. So you can make do with a hyphen. The meaning is clear. But what I noticed was when book chapter is being, the model for book chapter, N dash is there. 206 N dash 210. So I don't know how that is, whatever. Anyway, so what I'm saying is that in your thesis, if this is the model, that is what you need to follow, which means that you should put the title of the article in double quotation marks. The title of the article should be in title case. The journal itself may not use title case for journals, for article titles, but you are expected to capitalize every important word. Then the journal name is printed in full, not abbreviated. And it is in italics, as you could see. It is in italics and it is given in full. Then comes the year of publication. So you see international methods, then the year of publication, then the volume number, then the page numbers, and there is a dot at the end. If you are citing a book, you are expected to give the place of publication first, Princeton, New Jersey, USA, and then the year of publication. Now here, again, I don't know whether the Princeton, does it mean Princeton University Press? Maybe it's not clear. He could see it's the same thing in book chapter. New York, so place of publication, VCH is a publisher, of course, and volume 8 and so on. So that is what I was getting at in the formatting guidelines available for IIT Kanpur. This is what I could figure out, that it should be like that: authors, then the title of paper, title of journal, and so on. Names are not inverted. Then initials have dots after them. Spacing of initials can't be made out. So it's like this. Page numbers are given in full, not 121 N-8, but just 121 128. Issue number is included in brackets. So, okay, all these are really trivial details. So do we have any tools for that? Yes, there are quite a few tools. Although I would say that if it's your thesis or if it's maybe your first, second, third paper, I would actually suggest that you don't use automated tools for taking care of your references. I say this because if you do this manually, I mean, you type it out yourself, you are also fixing that in your mind, because you are launching on your academic career. These details should become sort of automated. Not only that, you are engaged with the reference. So you are typing the names of authors, you are typing the title of the paper. So that gets fixed in your memory, but it's just a personal view. There are tools available. For instance, if you are following APA style, then you can go to this style wizard. As you could see, it asks you to complete these details. So how many authors? So you can choose from the drop-down list. It's 1, 2, or 3, or 4, whatever. What type of work? Is it a journal article? But if you look the drop-down list, there'll be other options. So journal article, chapter in a book, whole book, conference presentation, website, whatever. And once you have filled these details, once you have given the data, then the wizard will format it, punctuate it, style it, whatever. You don't have to worry about that. Likewise, there are two open source tools, Zotero and Mendeley. You could use those, which are again good for taking care of references. I think one of the two has been acquired by Elsevier. I'm not too sure. I think Zotero has been taken over by Elsevier. So you could use that. There are also some websites. For instance, there's Citation C, very effective website. So essentially what you do is you supply the details. You don't even need to actually enter them. You can just click on the source and Citation C will format it for you depending on which style you have chosen. Edifix is also something similar, except that Edifix, I find it's oriented more towards biomedical literature. So engineering disciplines may not be adequately represented in its database. But the principle it works is very simple. Essentially what you do is, after you have compiled references, you copy it and paste it into Edifix page. Then the program will analyze, will examine your reference style, and it will point out if something needs to be fixed. So that's Edifix. You can take care of the minutiae of references. Lastly, I want to also tell you that, well, there could be a lot of errors. In fact, references are most prone to errors because researchers don't pay as much attention to getting the references correct. So this was a study. They examined errors in top medical journals. You can see it. The error rate is really quite high. So it's not something that you should neglect. So here are some good sources. Recent, right? There's a companion website to this book. Now, they say, I say, is not so much to do with the minutiae of formatting, but it's a particularly good book to read because it tells you how do you weave literature into your arguments. So that way, I would say it's a small handy book, but it's quite useful. Whereas Lipson's, like the other book, focuses more on the mechanical details. And it mentions all these styles. MLA, yesterday, I think one of you mentioned that, Modern Language Association, APA is American Psychological Association. Also, what struck me when I was looking at your guidelines for formatting thesis, that although it's, IIT, so I wouldn't have imagined that it is predominantly social sciences and humanities based institute. It's not, but the sources that are recommended are MLA, that is Modern Language Association, and APA, that's American Psychological Association. I would have expected either IEEE as a guide or scientific style and format. But anyway, that's for your institute to decide. This is also a good source on especially plagiarism. Although we'll touch upon plagiarism in the next session when we talk about how do you write a research paper. Also, there are some websites that give you enough information on this. How do you cite and so on. So here are the bibliographic details of this, both Lipson and the earlier one, Neville's. And Rectal's, these two articles you should read if you are really interested in this. Is, what can go wrong in the references and so on. So that's why I want to end this session with a quote from Rectal. So I hope you won't be lazy or sloppy or fraudulent. You'll be scrupulous, industrious, and honest. So I'll stop sharing at this point. If you have any questions, you are welcome to ask.
So thank you for presentation.
Thank you.
I need to ask you one thing that
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I need to ask you one thing that in case of engineering and management papers, do we have any particular style of making references, or APA and this MLA or Chicago or Harvard can be followed? And the second question is that there is any connection between the style of citation and the style of references we are making. Like if we are making a Harvard style of citation, then we need to have references in Harvard style only.
Okay. Now, your first question was about what source I would recommend. I would say that no, it will be presumptuous on my part to recommend. It's for your faculty to recommend. What struck me was that although this is Indian Institute of Technology, how is it that the sources were predominantly humanities and social sciences oriented? Whether it's Chicago, Chicago is sort of midway, but still it closer towards social sciences. APA is almost exclusively followed in social sciences, and MLA again is more in humanities. But this is something that only your faculty can tell you. I would say, for instance, there is this scientific style and format that is published by the Council of Science Editors in US that is predominantly science oriented. And especially with technology, I would have thought that IEEE, that's a reputable organization. I'm sure many of you are aware of that. So IEEE also has a style guide and system of references. So I would have expected that you might follow IEEE. The second question you said that, well, as far as Vancouver system is concerned, again, Vancouver system is mostly followed in medical journals, almost exclusively. Of course, it is also followed in engineering journals, but Vancouver system at least has an authoritative guide devoted entirely to all the details of Vancouver system. Whereas Harvard system has no such one authoritative source. Different publishers, different organizations, different journals use the basics of Harvard system, but they have their own minor variation. As I said, how many authors should be mentioned before you use et al. Then whether et al. Should be in italics or not. So all these are not codified any one standard source. It will depend on the publisher, on the journal.
So, sir, is there any connection between the manner of writing the citation as well as manner of writing references?
So in passing, as I mentioned, that now typically if the numbered system is followed, there's really no reason why you should invert the names of authors. Whereas if you are following the Harvard system, in which the names are sorted by the sorted in alphabetical order, then you will necessarily need to invert the names of authors with surname first and then the initials. So yes, there are minor differences which would link to the link between the style of citation, that is either Harvard or Vancouver, and the way references are given. But these are minor differences. In fact, there are some journals, fortunately very few, what they would expect their authors to do is follow the Vancouver system initially. Then once you have all the references in order, sort them alphabetically, renumber them, and renumber the text in the line of that. I mean, why make authors do all this? But yes, journals do that.
So whatever scheme we follow for citation, it should be followed completely for the entire document.
Yes, yes, of course. Yeah. If it's a single thesis, a single research paper, a single project report, yes, it should be consistent within that document. See, there are pros and cons. For instance, now I find the Harvard system to be more informative, because when you are reading the main document, when you are reading the main text, you know whether the references at least is recent or old, because the year has to be mentioned. And as you gain more and more experience, as you become more narrowly specialized, you also begin to identify the names of authors. So that way, I would say Harvard system is more informative to readers than the Vancouver system. But on the other hand, there are trade-offs. For instance, the Vancouver system doesn't occupy as much space as Harvard system. That's why you'll find most of the review publishers, there's this series of annual reviews. So annual review of physics, annual review of chemistry, whatever. All of them follow the Vancouver system because they are review papers. So there'll be hundreds of references and they don't want to occupy so much space. Again, many of these things actually go back to pre-digital days. Now it's all digital hypertext. So I really don't see any point in this, because you can embed the citation. So when you are reading in hypertext, you don't even need to go at the turn to the end of the paper. You can just click the link and be done with it. So I think the reference system has not really moved. It's not really kept itself up to date. That's my observation.
Hi, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Yes.
Sir, this is Madhav. Sir, actually, I have a doubt regarding fonts and styling. So I don't know if it's right session to ask.
Go ahead.
So, sir, my question is like in the figures, generally the text is like 12 and it's Times New Roman. But when we design a figure for a paper, we don't literally we keep the font as 12 but Times New Roman. But when we resize it according to the position where it goes, the font actually resizes. To how to go about it, and sometimes it gets like they say again, they tell that your font is not 12. So how should we work on that?
Yeah, no, it's a good, very practical question. For instance, again, incidentally, I noticed that in the guidelines that your institute has, it mentions that the references should be in 11 point, but I didn't find any reference to what the main text should be. So presumably it's in 12 points, but I don't know. But references, it says 11 point. Anyway, to come back to your question, yeah, resizing is a tricky matter, because as you rightly said, that when you start scaling the figures, and if the labels or the numbers are embedded in that, then they will scale proportionately. So maybe you originally used a 12-point font and then you scaled it. So it could be anywhere, between 9, 10, 10.1, 10.2, there's no end to it. So the solution to that is you scale the figure so that it fits and whatever parts you want to show are in the right proportion, and then add the identifiers. So 1 or 2 or A or B and whatever. So they should not really be smaller than 8 point. I would recommend 10 points, but you can consult the journal. But yes, this is often a problem, because when you rescale, the fonts also change. So that is why you should put the labels after you have scaled the figure. There should be a separate part of the figure.
So in the block diagrams, when we are putting some headers, like there's a block diagram and within that, so it won't be counted towards that scaling. Would that not be required to have that font 12?
No. So what I'm saying is that, let's say it's a multi-panel figure.
Yes, sir.
So you have figure 1, but figure 1 has maybe 2 or 3 or 4 panels. So you have figure 1A, figure 1B, and so on. So
Right,
you are
sir.
talking about the A and B and so on, right? The labels.
No, sir. I'm talking about, let's say, a block diagram. Let's say first program is let's say energy, and then we have solar energy and biomass.
Okay.
Like
So
that.
where the text is very much a part of the diagram itself.
Yes, sir.
Like a flow chart.
Right, sir.
Yeah. So then again, I would say, see, flow chart will have Either it will be just have arrows, or it may have some actual drawings or whatever, something visual, and there will be text also.
Right, sir.
Yeah. So again, what I would say is you first finalize the placement of the visual part of it.
Right, sir.
You get that in the whatever correct size that you want, and then add the text separately in only one style of font. So say 10 point. Actually, for figures, they use a recommend a non-serif font. So Arial or some other not serif font like Times New Roman, but you add it afterwards.
Right, sir. Okay, thank you, sir.
So it will be uniform. Yeah.
Sir, in the presentation you gave yesterday about the slides, one thing I think was missed is that how to insert equations in the slides in case,
Okay.
I mean, I'm taking equations from other source and putting it not as an image, but
Okay.
as a text. Or if I'm actually writing an equation using a particular format and there are symbols there and we have to also number those equations sometimes. So how?
Yeah. Okay. So initially, I mean, what is the native tool that you are using to compose the equations? Are you using the equations editor? Are you using LaTeX?
So the equations can be written using the tool itself present there for inserting symbol and equations.
So what
that
I'm
is already
saying
provided
that
there.
let us say that you have an equation now in whatever software that you are using. You have got the equation to your satisfaction. That is, the equation is exactly as you want it to be. Now you want to paste it into PowerPoint. That's what you are asking, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So best way would be if you open the PowerPoint, there is an option insert, and from insert you take a screen clipping. So you go to that, and then it will take you to your original document and with a rectangle. So you select the entire equation that will be automatically pasted into PowerPoint. So your equation will be exactly the way you want it. And then you can scale it. You can make it larger, you can make it smaller. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. And in case you are typing the equation, then its alignment and everything, whether it should be central aligned or...
No, wait. If there is just one equation, yeah, best is you would center it. But don't use PowerPoint to compose equations.
Yeah, that's
PowerPoint
what
is pretty pathetic in terms of that. So you better compose your equations in some other software and simply paste it into PowerPoint because you want to make it as a slide. That's all.
Sir, then what about Iguana Tech, which is used to insert the equations in PowerPoint?
So if there are specific tools, I must say I didn't know about this. So what I have been doing is, of course, first of all, it's rarely that I'm required to put equations in PowerPoint, but either, as I said, in PowerPoint itself, now there is this facility that you could use a screen grab. But the other tool that you are suggesting, well, that should also be possible. I mean, if it's specifically for putting equations into PowerPoint, yeah, by all means, use it.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, what happens when I cite a paper, but later it was found plagiarized? So what happens, like what to do in that case?
Well, it depends at what stage you are. So let's say that if your paper is already published.
Yes, sir.
So you cited a paper. Let's say you published a paper. So you had, let's say, 10 references. Now, one of which was later found to be plagiarized.
Yes, sir.
But your paper has already been published.
Okay.
So then there is nothing you can do about it. But if you find it that this happens while you are still correcting the proofs, or the final version is yet to be out, then you can amend it and say this was subsequently retracted, or you could just delete the citation and the references to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you,
But
sir.
you can't put toothpaste back into the tube after it is come out.
Exactly.
Yeah. If it's in hypertext, you could still do that because there is this retraction watch. So it keeps you abreast of what papers have been retracted or any corrections. Then if your paper is also on a website in HTML, then you can still do that with the website manager's consent, and you can update it. But printed one, no, there is nothing you can do.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any queries? Let me see if there's
Hello,
something
sir.
in the chat. Yeah.
Thank you, sir, for such a wonderful lecture.
Oh.
Sir, many
Yeah.
times we use softwares like Mendeley or Zotero, citation and references.
Yeah.
I found that there is a distortion between like the web paper was published and what is like expressed in the Mendeley. How we can handle that and can identify that easily?
No. In fact, that is why I'm saying that it is not a good idea to use these tools, because you are not engaged with these references as much. Because obviously you were, because that's why, whether it's Zotero, whether it's Mendeley, it doesn't matter. For instance, there's a reference manager, EndNote. But personally, I would say as scholars, you should engage with the references. So you should do it manually. I'm not saying that you should write down them by hand, but at least you can type them, because that way also you are making it, you're strengthening your memory traces. That is what I'm saying.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Not at all.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Yes.
Yes, yes, sir. So initially, if we are reading annotated bibliography, is it a good practice? Is it a good practice to include references in or citation in annotated bibliography?
See, annotated bibliography will be a collection of sources by itself. So there is no question of citation. So let's say you are publishing an annotated bibliography on a particular topic or a domain. Let's say any topic. So in that case, yes, there will be annotations. So in addition to the full reference, you will need to give your comments on that. That's why it's annotated. And in that case, you are free that you don't have to arrange it alphabetically. In fact, I would say a better thing for annotated bibliography would be reverse chronology. So you put the references or documents that have been published most recently upfront, and you work your way backwards. And for each of this, you will have your annotation. You will have a comment, whether this is, it could be a value judgment, it could be a description of the contents of that document, and so on. So there is no question of citation, because there is, what I was saying earlier is that there is a paper, there's the body of the paper which contains citations, and there is a list at the end which match the citations. But annotated bibliography is the whole text in itself, which is only references, or which are only sources. Let us call it sources, not references. So in that case, there is only one list. There is nothing else. There is no other text.
Okay, sir. Right. So we don't have to cite in the annotated form.
Where will
in
you
the
cite
comment
it?
section? Right.
The citation, the annotation
comments.
will be comments.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Sir, my question is like I am from electrical engineering. So, sir, when you submit a paper, like I use IEEE.
Yes.
So, what is the criterion, like whether you should abbreviate the name of the journals in the paper, or it's like you should give it full and then it should be on the reviewer, the publishing part, that whether they'll resize it or abbreviate it, or it's like whatever they want to do.
No.
So
It is your responsibility. Now, IEEE, as far as I know, publishes dozens of journals. So you will have chosen one particular journal within the IEEE stable to submit your paper. So what ideally you should do is, and this is what I will also mention in the next session, you should look up some recent issues of the journal to which you intend to submit your paper. Say check some recent published articles and see the references and how those references have been styled. And then you should style your references accordingly. Don't expect the journal editors to do that. No, that you are expected to do that.
So actually, I faced a lot of issue with the references because I have a couple of published papers.
Mhm.
Every time it's like I face this issue, like it's like I should give it full because when I abbreviate, then they say it's not standard. So it's a confusion actually. So I don't
No,
know.
no,
I
but
couldn't
no, no,
find
but
what is the practice.
no, no, the practice is, see, you go by the target journal. So the journal to which you intend to submit your paper, you follow
Hmm.
that. Now, of course, I know IEEE also what it does is it will reassign your paper to some other journal. Sometimes they
Okay.
do that. But
Okay.
when you submit your paper, you should have a particular journal in mind.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. So you consult recent issues of that journal
Okay.
and see how that journal treats references. So if it abbreviates journal
Okay.
titles, you should abbreviate journal titles. If it gives them in full, you should give them in full. If it prints in italics, you should italicize it. If it doesn't, don't italicize. So you should go
So
by
it's
the, yeah.
it's like you would it is it dependent on the journal in which you are submitting, because sometimes reviewers also ask like you should not abbreviate it, you should give it full, and then journal is having abbreviated journals, abbreviated titles. So sir, it's a lot of confusion, like
But
what is the true practice
true
to follow?
practice, no, for instance, IEEE has a comprehensive style guide. Have you consulted that?
Yes, sir. Actually, it happened, I think, 4 times with me.
Huh?
Initially, I used to abbreviate it according to the published papers. Then I found this problem, and then I started this practice of not to abbreviate it, just submit like that. Because then reviewers don't ask this question like your abbreviations are not standard,
Yes,
something
yes,
like
yes.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
So it creates a lot of confusion. So that's why I wanted to ask what is the correct practice to follow
No, no, in
when
fact, you have made a good point. I should have mentioned that. See, actually, so long as you give all the details. Now, for instance, you said that you've given the journal titles in full.
Yes.
Then it is easier for the copy editors to abbreviate the journal titles in whichever way they want. Or for instance, you supply the issue number and the journal doesn't want the
Okay.
issue numbers, then they can delete it. But if the
Okay.
journal wants issue numbers and you don't give it, then it's a hassle for
Okay.
them. So ideally, you
Okay.
should supply all the elements.
Information.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then leave it to their copy editors to do that. That is one. Second is you should also look up IEEE style guide. And then you can always mention in your covering letter to the journal that you have followed the style guide. But if there are any revisions, you'll be happy to do them.
Okay. So I have one more question. It's
Mhm.
like when you have very big names like Indian names, so you should put the initials like let's say it's a very
Mhm. So, for instance, you're talking of names in, especially from Andhra, for instance, too many initials. Is that what you're saying? Have I lost you? You can hear me?
yes sir. Yeah, that is the
yeah.
issue. People from South India, like they have
Yeah,
very
yeah.
long names. Yeah. Yeah.
There is one simple thing you could do. Let's say that you are citing a particular paper and you want to know how to handle it in terms of initials and so on. So what you could do is go to Google Scholar. Now see if that paper is available in Google Scholar and see how other
So
journals.
it's my paper only, so I have to submit it like which what I should put in the initials or what I should put in the surname. So it's a confusion always.
No, wait. Are you talking about the names of authors of paper, or you're talking about authors whose papers you are referring to?
No, sir. Let's say I want to submit a paper, and then the person
it
is
would be
having a big
Chawla
name.
A. So won't
No,
you?
that is easy, sir. But
Then?
it's like people from it's let's say it's Palla Siva Kumar. Then it's a confusion like whether should I put Siva Kumar in the surname or it should P.S. Kumar. So that is my.
But
sometimes it's NVD something. So that is my problem.
But if these people are your co-authors, can't you
Yes,
ask them what their preference is?
Yeah, but sometimes it's not possible. Like, so people don't reply. So I just wanted to ask, what is the general
Oh,
practice?
okay.
Last name, it's like that is fine, or it's like
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
See, if you are really particular, because there are a couple of guides. For instance, there is a whole book. The title of that book is Names of Persons, and it tells you how to cite. For instance, now it's a good example. For instance, in South Indian names, you take Rao, R-A-O. Now that at times it is also indicator of the caste. So there'll be
Okay.
so many. So in that case, what
Okay.
you do is you also take the part before Rao and take it
Okay.
as a surname.
Okay.
The same thing with Singh, because Singh is so common. So the convention is that then you include the part before the Singh, and that forms the surname.
Okay.
So
Okay,
it is
sir.
not just Singh, but say Arjun Singh.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir.
Not at all. And you could also run a search, because that your co-author, maybe he or she is not responding to you, but they may have published some other papers in the past, and see how those
No,
have
sir,
been.
it's like fresh people, like they're
Achha,
working
okay,
for the
okay.
first time. So there's still sometimes people, they also don't know what to put. So
Yeah.
that's why I asked, like, maybe you know something. So
No. So
it
as I
might
said,
help.
there are a couple of guides. In fact, if you email me, I can give you more details. And second thing is, your best source in this case is you ask your library people, because they are taught how these different names are to be handled. Not just
Okay.
Indian, but Indian
Yes.
names, Spanish names, French names.
Yeah,
There is a
sir,
whole
because
lot
I
of
faced
things.
this issue in one of the
No. Just
people who got
consult your library staff. They will be very happy to help you, and they will know exactly how this is done, because they
done.
have been taught specifically on this.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Welcome.
Is there any more query?
Okay, so we
So,
can. Yeah.
yes, sir. We can conclude this session.
Right.
And next session we will start at 12:45 p.m.
Yes.
So I would request the participants to stay logged in.
Yeah.
We will continue in the same meeting.